For the past 16 years, Beth Krom has been a leader and a lightning rod. As a council member in politically divided Irvine and a Democrat in a Republican-dominated county, she's won some, lost some. Through it all, she's been a popular vote-getter, twice elected Irvine mayor. Now she's left politics, at least for now. She'll tell us why. Beth Krom, next on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University, with its Center for Science and Technology, under construction in Orange, California, is a proud sponsor of Inside OC.
Hi, I'm Rick Reiff, and I'm talking with Beth Krom. So, Beth, great to have you on.
Thank you.
And 16 years you have been in Irvine politics. What's the best part, and then, you know, the second question will be the worst part, but what's the best part of public service?
Well, you know, while I certainly have been in politics for 16 years, and if people call me a politician, I accept that, I think throughout my life I've always sort of been an advocate, an educator, and a community builder. And I think the best part of my public life has been the relationship that I've been able to develop with people in the community, institutions, and organizations. I like to understand how communities work and how to make them work better. And Orange County and Irvine have provided a great landscape to do that.
Okay, what's the worst part of public service?
You know, I'll give you the answer that I give to children when they ask me that question, and I go into the schools and I say, you know what it feels like when you maybe walk into the cafeteria and everybody seems to know something about you, but you don't know what it is, and people are making judgments about you without actually knowing you at all? I find that to be the most difficult part. I'm more than willing to engage directly on any issue, but the inclination of people to define who you are or to redefine who you are, that troubles me. And I think we see more and more of it in politics, and I don't think it makes for a better political environment.
Yeah, give me an example. What was something that you feel people, how you were defined that you think was unfair?
Well, I'll tell you, because people love these little anecdotes. In 2006, there was a little brouhaha over a sister city relationship that was never actually consummated with a district in Xuhui in Shanghai. And, there was an effort to portray me as I ran for mayor for my second term as somebody who was making backroom deals with the communist Chinese and selling out the Taiwanese, which wasn't true. We did have a Taiwanese sister city and very close relationships. But, people had an opportunity and they seized it. So one day I came home and I opened my mailbox and I pulled out a mailer that was patterned after a 1950s anti-communist, poster, only where the picture of Mao Zedong would have been was my picture, and it said, while other people are serving the community, Beth Krom is making backroom deals with the communist Chinese. And in the end, it's kind of a funny thing to look back on because it was so over the top. I won resoundingly. I think actually they used a very good picture of me, which helped in my election. But the fact that people will go to those kinds of lengths to really mischaracterize who you are, I think in the end it says more about them than it does about you, but it doesn't take that much to fool the community. So I was grateful that I had built enough of a relationship with the citizens that they didn't buy into that.
Is it getting worse?
It's getting worse. It's getting worse. I mean, this last election, which I wasn't a part of, was the worst. And when $1 million is spent in a local race to basically paint somebody, as was done with the one of the candidates for mayor, as being someone they're not, painting someone who you want to win as someone they're not, and trying to confuse the voters long enough to get them to vote against their own interests, I don't think that's better for our democracy.
Well, do you feel that when I say your side, I'm talking about yourself and Larry Agrin and Suki Kang. For many years, you were the three controlling members of the council.
Years, yeah.
But Larry Agrin, the former mayor, former council member, you know, he would put out this campaign mailer that looked like a newspaper, but it wasn't really a newspaper. It was a campaign mailer. And you know, I mean, your side did things too. Some folks felt that those ethic ordinances that you passed were really vehicles so you could entrap a certain council person who fit that definition, and then you have mailers saying this person's unethical. So do you plead guilty that your side did that too? It wasn't just one-sided. It was just maybe nasty politics all around?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, after 16 years, you know, and people often, you know, said I was a puppet for other people on the council. Anybody who's ever met me knows that I show up every day as myself, using my own brain. And so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and debate what may have been done because I wasn't involved in all of those things. And truthfully, you know, if there were things that happened that were, you know, inappropriate, they would have been addressed as such. Right now, what we have are people, institutions, developers who are willing to spend $1 million to get a council that is controlled by them and that will do their bidding. I don't think that's in the best interest of the community. I will tell you the 12 years that Larry Agrin, myself, and Suki Kang were in the majority, the city garnered every accolade you could imagine. We were the safest city in America, all but a few of those years. We stopped the airport. So, you know, what's interesting to me is that people prefer to talk about personalities or the tit for tat politically and not talk about the actual issues of how the community is functioning, what we were able to achieve, and where we are today as compared to in those days. Personally, I think the city was in better shape in the years that we controlled it, but because Orange County, I think falsely, thinks of itself as a Republican-controlled county, there was just a lot of negative energy that got directed at us, and ultimately it changed the shape of our council.
Okay, let's talk about probably the most controversial issue, which is the Great Park. And there's a narrative, and we've talked about this, and you've let me know you definitely don't agree with the narrative that I and many others have espoused, which is that the Great Park, there was $200 million spent on the Great Park with almost nothing to show for it. And the money went for plans and drawings. It went to consultants. There was a PR firm getting $1 million a year, no bid, and that there was a lot of waste and dysfunction. What is your narrative?
Well, I love how you use the question to just put a number of things out there that I would, if I had enough time, completely challenge. But let me, I will attempt to do so concisely because we only have an hour or whatever. But first of all, I consider stopping the El Toro Airport plan to be one of the greatest achievements of my time in political life. And the city of Irvine was incredibly instrumental. There was a whole coalition of South County cities that were involved, and everybody deserves credit. But at the end of the day, the city of Irvine put $27 million on the line to stop that airport. And we successfully did it with Measure W. And there were a lot of people who weren't happy about that because they felt their interests were better served had there been an airport. And unfortunately, we're a very large county. You know, I tell people, when the El Toro base was commissioned, there were less than 200,000 people in the entire county. Now there are more than 200,000 people in Irvine. There are more than 3 million people in Orange County. Trying to coalesce people around any kind of idea here is not easy. But here's what I'll tell you. Yes, I believe in planning. I have no apologies to make for the fact that we went out and we found innovative, visionary people. Now the park is essentially being planned by developers who have different interests, I think, than the interests that we had for the kind of park we wanted. I felt that the people of Orange County really owed a debt of gratitude to the federal government for basically commandeering 7 square miles of James Irvine's prized lima bean fields to create this military base, because we wouldn't have had 7 square miles in the heart of Orange County to do anything aspirational with had they not. But when you say that we spent $200 million and nothing to show for it, the truth is right now the only features that people are using at the park are features that we designed and built. So yes, there was a lot built out there, and in fact, the very developers who now are developing another, 688 acres of the park are using images taken from the parts of the park that we built in order to demonstrate what that park is going to be like. I accept that things changed. Unfortunately, what I've learned from this whole process is that you can fight the adverse impacts of a park only to get the adverse impacts of development and the adverse impacts of the commercialization of the very park that you had hoped would be more in keeping with a Balboa Park or a Golden Gate Park or a Central Park in New York. But we are where we are, and I'm hopeful that the people both in political leadership in the city and also those people within the development community who have a tremendous amount of influence on what that park will be will think beyond simply commercializing the park, putting roads through the park. We wanted a park with no roads. We wanted a park where people would park their cars at the edges and use advanced transit, where they would come from the train station. Now what we're really going to have is a little city there with a lot of interesting but not necessarily passive or inviting park features. And if you want to go there and play ball with your kid, you might be behind 27 buses that are bringing people in from all over California or the western part of the United States. So I think it remains to be seen how it goes, but I would debate anybody at any time about the value of the planning that we did and about the value of the investments that we made.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, 5 Point is a sponsor of this show, and they are the developer at the Great Park for that commercial area that you referred to. So you feel that the $200 million was well spent, because much of that $200 million were designs that aren't going to happen, the underground canyon and all those kinds of things.
But why aren't those designs going to happen? They're not going to happen not because they couldn't happen. They're not going to happen because the political leadership and the developers basically had a different vision and had the political power in order to shift that vision.
And not because it was unrealistic with no source of money to fund any of those things.
First of all, when we created that plan, we had redevelopment. Redevelopment would have brought us about $1.4 billion in revenue. We had no crystal ball, had no way of knowing the state was going to do away with redevelopment. The state has actually given the city of Irvine almost $300 million sort of as a cash out on redevelopment. So we're talking about what 5 Point is doing, which is a $170 million proposition. We have $300 million, a little less than $300 million. What I see, Rick, is that we stood by the developer when the developer couldn't develop because the economy changed and the housing market collapsed, and because they couldn't develop, resources didn't flow into the redevelopment area. Then the state did away with redevelopment. That was exploited when the opportunity came up for, hey, how are we going to build a park in this new world before we had gotten the settlement from the state? And so my feeling is the 1,347 acres that were dedicated for the Orange County Great Park is a public trust. It should be under public stewardship. By the way, I also think it's the Orange County Great Park. Yes, it's in my city, the city of Irvine, but I'm offended that the whole narrative has now shifted to somehow this is Irvine's park and not a park for all the people of Orange County. So I think we had to invest it. We have overpasses that separate the train tracks from the roads that cost $70 million. It's a lot of money, $70 million, and nobody's ever going to fly into John Wayne and say, honey, before we go to Disneyland, let's take the kids over to see the Jeffrey overcrossing because it costs $70 million. Infrastructure is expensive. This is the first time anybody ever tried to convert a military base into a great metropolitan park. Out of context, those numbers sound big, but yes. And is every penny ever perfectly spent? No. But when you're trying to move a visionary project forward, amidst the kind of political headwinds that we deal with here in Orange County, I feel like we did a great job.
Okay. When you talk about maybe some of the money not well spent, what is your explanation for the public relations contract that Ford and Mulrick got $1 million a year for public relations?
Well,
some people say for a park that isn't even built yet.
Listen, you know, we did annual events that some of my colleagues on the city council called parties. They weren't parties to me. You refer to it as public relations. What I refer to it as is we have a massive project, a massive opportunity to really change the landscape of Orange County. And we have 3 million people here. And how do you bring people into that process? You do so by outreach and education, by creating opportunities for people to come together for charrettes and other projects. That's what was happening. And yes, of course we wanted people to know what was going on. I feel equally frustrated by the fact that the very first thing that the many on the current council did, I think with the support of the developers, was to completely deactivate the park, to start charging for the balloon. We had people out there really enjoying it and experiencing it. I think there was an interest in disconnecting people from the park so that the whole park vision could be changed, so people could pursue their own agendas. I never hear anybody challenge those agendas, Rick. When do you have those shows where you ask people what their agendas are?
I always ask people what their agendas
okay.
are. So anyway, but the Ford and Mulrick, you thought that was money well spent, the public relations
I
money.
think the interest in educating and engaging people from throughout Orange County was a very worthwhile interest. So if it cost some money for us to do that, I will tell you, $1 million was spent to try and buy the campaign in Irvine. Somebody thought that was money well spent. I guess those are where we have our differences of agreement.
Okay, all right. Let's switch a little. You have an interesting background, and you actually grew up in the media as one who is often the subject of the media. You know what it's like to be in the media. Explain that.
Well, my father was an anchorman in Buffalo, New York, ABC affiliate, WKBW, from the mid-'60s until he retired just before 2000. And I tell people, you know, when I was growing up, if I wanted to see my father, I had to watch the news. And I think that that is one of the reasons that I got into political life and that I've always been interested in what's going on around me. I mean, I grew up during very interesting times. I was in kindergarten when Kennedy was assassinated. I went through all the civil rights, women's rights, Vietnam War, first man on the moon. This was what was coming into my house, and television was a very new medium at that time. So yes, I think that that was a tremendous influence. I will say that my father was a newsman at a time when I feel the media was far more invested in bringing people facts and allowing them to process that information and come to their own conclusions than we see today. But it was pretty cool. I felt like it was great.
Right, just the same kind of thing I'm doing here right now, right?
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
Thank you for trying to save your industry.
Okay, yeah. Yes. So how did you wind up here in Orange County? You grew up in Buffalo?
In Buffalo, just outside of Buffalo. My dad was on the Buffalo station. I got my degree at the University of Texas at Austin, and I met my husband while I was in Texas. He was living in Waco. I was teaching in Austin. He was living in Waco. As a condition of my marriage, I moved to Waco for a few years. I tell people I think I was meant to live in Waco to prepare me for the political environment here in Orange County. Everything, look, everything has a benefit. If you look at everything as a learning opportunity, I think you gain much more from it. But we moved out here. My husband had a practice across from UCI. He was an optometrist, raised our children here, and that's how we got here.
And speaking of family, you have had some adversity in the family. First, tell us about Solly, your husband.
Well, my husband has a neurologic, a cerebellar degeneration, which was diagnosed in 1996. So it's been about 20 years, and ultimately he had to stop working in his field. But he's doing okay. It's changed his life in profound ways. I tell people I'm more Nurse Ratched than Florence Nightingale, so he knows that he is independent by his nature, but it's his desire and my desire that he remain as independent as possible, and he has, and that's a great testament to his spirit. So he's great. Our daughter, our oldest, got married this past September, and she actually got him up out of his wheelchair to dance, which was a very special moment. And so we that was a big challenge. We lost a son 7 years ago. That was a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
And
that was Noah, and tell us, and you said something had happened just before that too.
Well,
with the
actually,
other son.
my son Noah had an accidental fall from the cliffs in Isla Vista, adjacent to UCSB, a week before his graduation. Just probably 2 weeks before that, my younger son Herschel had been riding his bike home from UC Santa Cruz, where he was a student, and somebody made an illegal U-turn in front of him, and he flipped over the handlebars and thankfully was not seriously injured. But we felt very lucky. And then, what I think every parent would say is the worst thing that can happen to you did happen to us. I had launched my campaign for Congress 3 months earlier, and Noah was my most innately political child. I felt like he was with me on that journey, and I think that's all that kept me going. But I have to say, losing that race, which we understood the odds going into it, and it was interesting because you talk about media and people don't know what they don't know, and when I decided to run for Congress against John Campbell, people still thought I was running against Chris Cox, who had left 5 years earlier. And I said, no, well, Chris left, and then they said, well, who are you running against? I said, John Campbell. They said, the guy who's running for Senate? I said, no, that's Tom Campbell. Tom Campbell was running against Barbara Boxer. They said, the guy on the Board of Supervisors? I said, no, that's Bill Campbell. So we kind of jokingly said I could have been running against a can of Campbell soup, and I would have probably gotten similar numbers, although I am very proud. You talk about the partisanship here in Orange County. I'm very proud that we got 7% above party registration, that we raised over $700,000, that none of it came from corporate PACs. I mean, in politics, you have to create your own victories, even amidst your challenges. And the fact that I made it through that race, I did feel like Noah was with me. I tell people, if there's a question you should never ask someone who's running for office, it's, do you really think you can win? Because if people didn't believe they could win, they wouldn't be able to get out of bed. And so when people would ask, I would sort of say, both because I believed it and also because I knew they would not, come back with a follow-up question, I said, I feel like Noah's got my back. And on election night, when the numbers were coming in, it was pretty clear that we weren't gonna win the race. I thought about it, and I thought, I think Noah's still got my back, because I felt like to go into Washington at a time when there was the major shift towards the Tea Party, things were moving in different directions in DC as well. Dealing with my grief, that probably would have undone me in ways that might never have been repaired. So I'm sort of grateful. That was my one political loss, and I kind of think it happened for a reason. But yes, we miss Noah every day, and he still is a good source of support and advice for me. So thank you.
And thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So I guess maybe you answered the question why you are getting out of it now. You said there's grief, and the political landscape just isn't very good right now.
Yeah, I mean, when you go through a trauma, and I'm not going to say losing a child is the only trauma that would cause somebody to rethink what they're doing, but particularly something that profound, you lose your appetite for kind of the nonsense. You all of a sudden, everything that's not important fades to black, and you realize that One, you're not immortal. You know, we have a finite number of moments on this earth. And am I doing with my time, my talent, my energy, you know, what really speaks to my heart? And I felt there were things that I hadn't had an opportunity to do because of the 16 years in public life that I wanted to get back to.
In 10 seconds, what are those things?
Well, you know, people may or may not be surprised to know that I write verses, so I write serendipitous things, but I also do more serious writing and illustrating. I had a little stint in stand-up comedy many, many years ago.
Oh,
I know.
right.
Well, but
So writing, stand-up comedy, and we'll have you back on the show for some stand-up comedy.
And I'll tell you that I have been known to point out that if you can get a room full of drunks to laugh at 2 in the morning, you can run for public office. So.
All right. So that's it for now. Thanks again to my guest, Beth Krom. You can watch this show and past shows at pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch us and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University, with its Center for Science and Technology, under construction in Orange, California, is a proud sponsor of Inside OC.